5.5 cents. That's what the fix cost. 1 nickel and 1 penny per rifle back in 1948. Remington's own engineer designed it, put it on paper, and the company said no. Too expensive. I want you to sit with that number for a second, because everything else in this story hangs off it. Not a recall that came too late. Not a lawsuit that dragged on for years. Those came too, and we'll get to them. But it starts with a man who invented one of the most successful rifles in American history, who looked at his own design, saw a way to make it safer, priced it out at 5.5 cents a gun, and watched his employer decide that was too much to spend. His name was Merle Walker. Everybody called him Mike. And if you own a bolt-action rifle, there's a real chance the trigger inside it traces back to the mechanism he built. I sold Remington Model 700s for years. Behind the counter, it was the easy sale. Somebody walks in, wants a deer rifle that'll outlive them. You point at the 700. Most accurate factory bolt gun for the money, smooth as anything, the rifle the military picked for its snipers. That reputation is earned. I'm not here to tell you the Model 700 is junk, because it isn't. Millions of them have gone bang exactly when the trigger was pulled and stayed quiet every other second of their lives. But there's a piece of this rifle's history that the guy behind the counter never brings up. Most of the time because he doesn't know it. I didn't know it, not for years. And the part that got to me, once I did know it, wasn't the mechanism, it was the paper trail. Because this isn't a story about a part that might fail. It's a story about a company that was told, in writing, by its own people, over and over, for decades, and kept deciding the fix cost too much. Let me tell you what's actually on the record, and let me be careful about it, because this matters. There are things here that are documented fact, sitting in court files and official notices. And there are things that are allegations, claims made in lawsuits that Remington has fought and denied for as long as they've existed. I'm going to keep those two piles separate the whole way through, because the story is strong enough that I don't need to blur them, and you deserve to know which is which. Here's the mechanism, in plain terms, no engineering degree required. The old trigger design is called the Walker Fire Control, named for Mike Walker, who patented it in the 1940s. Inside it, there's a small part that plaintiffs in lawsuits have called the trigger connector. The claim in those lawsuits, and I want to flag that clearly as the plaintiff's claim, is that debris, grit, dried oil could get in there and keep that part from resetting properly, and that under the wrong conditions, the rifle could fire without anybody touching the trigger. Sometimes when the safety was pushed off, sometimes when the bolt was worked. Remington's position on that, for the record, has never wavered. The company has said the rifle is safe. It has said the design is free of defects. It has said over and over that when one of these guns went off, it was because somebody did something wrong with it, mishandled it, modified it, not the gun, the person. Hold on to that, because the company still says it, even after everything you're about to hear. And I want to put a face on why any of this matters before I bury you in dates, because it's easy to talk about triggers and connectors and forget what's actually at stake. In October of 2000, in Montana, a woman named Barbara Barber was unloading a Model 700. Her 9-year-old son, Gus, was on the other side of the family's horse trailer. According to the account her family gave in the lawsuit that followed, the rifle fired as she moved the safety to unload it. Her finger, they said, was nowhere near the trigger. The bullet went through the trailer and killed the boy. Now, I have to label that carefully, the way I promised I would. That is the account in a lawsuit. Remington did not admit the gun was at fault. The case was settled, and the terms weren't made public. But here's the part that isn't in dispute. Gus's father, Rich Barber, did not go away. He spent years collecting the company's own internal documents, tens of thousands of pages of them, and Montana passed a law with his son's name on it, aimed at the kind of court secrecy that had kept cases like this quiet. When you hear the internal memos I'm about to walk through, a lot of them are public because a grieving father refused to stop digging. Now here's where the paper comes in. Back in 1946, before this rifle line was even on the market, Mike Walker wrote a memo. In it, he described what he called a theoretical unsafe condition involving the safety. His own words, in his own memo, before a single one of these was sold. An inspection report the following year, 1947, put it more bluntly, warning that the situation could be, quote, very dangerous, Under 15 words there, I'm quoting exactly because the exact words matter. Then 1948. This is the one. Walker proposed a change, a trigger block, a design that would hold the trigger and connector locked in place while the safety was on. An internal analysis looked at his proposal and called it the best design. Those are the company's own words about their own engineer's fix, the best design. And then, in the same breath, they turned it down. The reason they wrote down was the cost, 5.5 cents per gun. I keep coming back to that, and I know I keep saying it, but I want it to land the way it landed on me. Not $5, not 50 cents, 5.5 cents, on a rifle that sold for the better part of a century, on millions of units, and the number in the file that explains why they didn't do it is the cost. And Walker didn't let it go. He left the company in the 1970s, and even after he was gone, he was still writing to them about it. There's a letter from 1982 where he pleads with his old employer, and again I'm quoting exactly because it's short and it's his. Please don't bring out a new bolt action without a foolproof safety. The man who built the thing spent decades asking them to make the version he'd already drawn up, the one that cost 5.5 cents. So that's the origin. Now let me show you what the company did and didn't do about it as the years went on, because this is where a single old memo turns into a pattern, and a pattern is a different animal than a mistake. A mistake is one bad call in 1948. What the record shows is a company that kept getting the same information and kept making the same call. There's a letter from 1975 from a Remington research manager saying the company could reproduce the problem, could make it happen. That's their word internally, decades before any recall. There's a memo from 1980 looking at a batch of rifles customers had sent back complaining they fired on their own, and in about a third of them, the company's own people verified the complaint. Verified, not dismissed as user error, verified in their own paperwork. And here's the one that, to me, is the quiet gut punch. In 1995, Remington paid an independent laboratory to study this, an outside lab, on the company's dime. And that study concluded that inadvertent firings could happen, that they could be caused by debris. The company had it. And that study stayed sealed, out of public view, until reporters pulled it into daylight, 2 decades later. I want to be fair here, because fair is the only thing that makes the rest of this worth listening to. There are 2 sides to the design question, and one of them is Mike Walker himself. Because late in his life, under oath, in a videotaped deposition, Walker defended his design. He said the trigger was safe. He said his objections over the years were about the manufacturing process, the quality of the metal in some of the parts, not the fundamental design. He called his own invention a perfect trigger. When somebody asked him whether the company had put profit ahead of lives, he said no. He said he thought it was stupidity, not malice. Stupidity. So you've got the inventor, the one man who understood it better than anyone, saying the design was sound. That's real, and I'm not going to hide it from you to make the story cleaner. Juries have sided with Remington too in some of these cases, when the argument came down to how the gun was handled. This is not a settled, one-sided thing where every question has been answered against the company. It hasn't been, and to keep it honest in the other direction, some of these cases went very badly for Remington. There's a Texas case from the 1990s where, according to reporting on it, a jury ordered the company to pay a Texas man $17 million after his rifle fired into his foot while he was unloading it, and he lost part of the leg. I'll use the careful language there, because it's the right language. A jury ordered that. It's not the same as a final check written for that amount, and cases like this often get resolved afterward on confidential terms, which is exactly what reporting says happened here, after the company agreed not to appeal. So you have juries going both ways, big awards in some, wins for the company in others, and a whole lot of settlements sealed shut where we'll never know the terms. That messiness is real. I'm not going to pretend the courts have spoken with one clean voice because they haven't. What I'm pointing at isn't a verdict. It's the paper trail underneath all of it, and that paper trail says the same thing no matter which way any single jury went. But here's what pulls it back. Even if Walker was right, that the design itself was fine, the company's own labs verified guns firing on their own. The company's own paperwork proposed a fix and priced it and rejected it over pennies. Whether you call the root cause a design flaw or a manufacturing problem, The thing that stays constant is that Remington had the information, had a proposed fix, and kept the fix in a drawer. Now, let's talk about the reckoning, because eventually it came, and I need you to watch the exact shape of it, because the shape is the whole point. There are two separate things people mix up, and keeping them straight is where most of the internet gets this wrong. There's a recall, and there's a settlement. They are not the same, and they did not cover the same guns. The recall came in 2014. It was voluntary, meaning Remington chose to do it rather than being ordered to, and it covered a specific, narrow slice. Model 700 and Model 7 rifles with a newer trigger, one called the X Mark Pro, made in a specific window from May of 2006 to April of 2014. The reason the company gave for that recall was not the old design at all. It was excess bonding agent, basically too much of a manufacturing compound, gumming up the newer trigger. So the recall, in the company's own framing, was about a factory process on the new trigger, not the old Walker one. Which raises the obvious question, what about all the rifles with the old Walker trigger? The tens of millions of guns dating back to 1948, running the exact mechanism that generated all those lawsuits and all those internal memos. Those never got a voluntary recall, not one. What they got was a settlement. And this is the part I need you to hear clearly, because it would be easy for me to tell you the old guns were just abandoned, and that would be the more outrageous story, and it would also be wrong. So here's the true version, which is outrageous in a different way. A man named Ian Pollard sued Remington in 2013. He said his Model 700 fired without him pulling the trigger. His case became a class action, one of those lawsuits that stands in for millions of people at once. And in the end, Remington agreed to a settlement. Under it, the company agreed to replace the old Walker triggers. The ones that couldn't safely be retrofitted got vouchers instead, and people who'd already paid out of pocket to swap their trigger could get reimbursed. On paper, that covered somewhere around 7.5 million rifles. 7.5 million. So the fix existed, finally. Court-ordered, decades late, but it existed, and it was free. Here's the number that turns this from a legal footnote into the thing I wanted to tell you about in the first place. Almost nobody got it. Of those millions of eligible rifles, the share of owners who actually filed a claim was a fraction of 1%. Not a third, not 10%, a fraction of 1%. Let me give you the actual numbers because they're almost hard to believe. When the settlement was first publicized, the claims that came in were counted in the low thousands. A couple thousand people, out of millions. The judge overseeing it flagged how low that was. They ran the notice again, tried harder to reach people, and by the last time the count was reported to the court, a couple of years in, the number had climbed to somewhere around 22,000 claims. That sounds like a lot, until you set it next to the pool it's drawn from. 22,000 against roughly 7.5 million rifles. Do that division, and you're at well under 1%, under a third of 1%. And after that, the final tally, the number of people who claimed by the time the window closed, was never even made public. Nobody released it. Think about what that means in the real world. Millions of these rifles, the exact ones at the center of the whole story, are still out there. In closets, in truck racks, handed down to somebody's kid, passed across a gun show table. And the people who own them, the overwhelming majority, have no idea any of this ever happened. Never heard the name Pollard. Never heard of a free trigger. Nothing. And I'll be honest with you, because honesty is the only thing this channel has to sell. Part of that low number is just how these things work. Legal notices are boring. People throw them out. Gun owners in particular aren't lining up to mail their rifle to a manufacturer over a form letter. That's real, and it's not all on the company. But a judge, looking at this settlement, noticed something else worth sitting with. By approving it, Remington got clear of what one estimate put it close to $500 million in potential liability for a cost that came out to a small fraction of that. A very good trade if you're Remington. A settlement that resolves an enormous exposure at a bargain, in part because almost nobody shows up to collect. I went looking for the official recall site myself, the one printed in the notices, the address they told owners to go to, type in your serial number, find out if your rifle is one of them. It's the most basic thing a person could do to check. I typed it in. Nothing. The page is gone. The official place they pointed millions of owners to find out if the rifle in their hands is one of the affected ones doesn't come up. Now, I want to be square with you about what I can and can't tell you there, because that's the deal on this channel. I'm not going to stand here and tell you there's no way left on earth to check, because I haven't run down every phone line and every mailing address to prove that. What I can tell you is what I saw with my own eyes. The web address they put in the official notice, the front door, the one they told everybody to use. I went to it. It didn't load. Make of that what you want. Before I go further, one thing I owe you, because this channel doesn't do outrage, it can't stand behind. Everything I just told you about the memos, the verified complaints, the sealed study, comes out of a long investigation by CNBC and the court files behind these cases. I didn't dig these documents out of a vault myself. They've been public for years, sitting in reporting and in dockets that anybody can pull. I'm the guy connecting them for you, not the guy who found them. And Remington, through all of it, has denied wrongdoing, denied a design defect, and said it's settled to avoid the cost and risk of dragging the fight out, not because the gun is unsafe. That's their position. It's on the record. It goes in the video. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, the stuff the guy behind the counter either doesn't know or won't say, subscribe. That's the whole ask. It's free and it tells me to keep making these. Now, there's one more piece, and it's the one that makes the just mail it in answer more complicated than it sounds, and it's the part almost nobody understands. The Remington that did all this, the company in these memos, the company that ran that recall and signed that settlement, essentially doesn't exist anymore in the form that owed you anything. This is where you have to be careful, and I'm going to be careful, because it would be easy and wrong to point the finger at the wrong people. The old Remington went through owners like a rental car. For most of the 20th century, it belonged to DuPont, the chemical giant. In the 1990s, DuPont sold it off. Then, in 2007, a private equity firm called Cerberus bought it and rolled it into a group of gun companies, a group that eventually took the name Remington Outdoor. That's the ownership that was in charge during the CNBC investigation, during the 2014 recall, during the Pollard settlement. Private equity, running a portfolio, with the rifle as one line item among many. Then came bankruptcy, not once, twice. The first time, in 2018, the company went into Chapter 11 and came back out within a couple of months under its lenders, and the settlement survived that. But the second one, in 2020, was the end of the thing as a single company. It got carved into pieces on the courthouse steps and sold off to different buyers. The ammunition business went one direction and has changed hands more than once since. The Marlin brand went to Ruger. And the name and the gun-making business, the part that makes a rifle-stamped Remington, went another direction entirely, to a new company operating today as Rem Arms. And Rem Arms, the company making Remington-branded rifles now, has said in plain language that it is a new company and that it does not take on responsibility for the products the old company made. I'm not editorializing on that. That's their stated position. Which means the entity that wrote those memos, that priced the fix at 5.5 cents and passed, that sat on a sealed study, is gone, dissolved through bankruptcy. And the obligations that came with being that company are a genuinely murky question, because the party that owed them got taken apart and sold for parts. So when somebody tells you, just send the old gun in, it's covered, the honest answer is, it's a lot foggier than that. The company that made the promise isn't the company whose name is on the rifle anymore. Let me bring this back to where we started, to the 5.5 cents, because now you can see the whole shape of it. 1946. The engineer writes down an unsafe condition before the gun ships. 1948. He proposes the fix. They call it the best design, and they reject it over 5.5 cents. 1975. The company can reproduce the problem in its own shop. 1980. Verifies it in a third of returned guns. 1995. Pays a lab that confirms it and seals the result. 2014 recalls a different, newer trigger for a different, narrower reason. 2017 and after settles the old trigger cases covering 7.5 million rifles, and almost nobody collects. And then the company that owed all of it comes apart in bankruptcy, and the front door they told owners to use to check when I went and knocked on it didn't open. That's not a defect story. Defects happen. Every manufacturer has them. A defect is an accident. It's the thing nobody chose. This is the opposite of that. This is a decision story, a long chain of decisions, each one documented, each one landing the same way, each one on the record for anybody willing to read it. And the thing about decisions is that somebody makes them. A defect doesn't have an author. A decision does. Look at the arithmetic of the last one, the settlement, because it tells you how the whole chain worked. A judge looking at that deal noted that Remington cleared something in the neighborhood of $500 million in potential liability, and the cost of actually doing it came out to a tiny fraction of that. That gap only works. That math only comes out in the company's favor, because almost nobody claims. The low turnout isn't a bug in that outcome. It's the engine of it. A fix that millions are entitled to and almost none receive is, on a spreadsheet, a very good fix to offer. It closes the case, it clears the liability, and it barely costs anything, precisely because the people it's meant for never find out it exists. Every step of this story rhymes with the first one. 1948, the cheapest number one. And every time the same choice came around again, the cheapest number one again. 5.5 cents. That was the price of the version where none of the rest of this had to happen. They knew the number, it's in their own file, and they decided you weren't worth it. If your rifle's an old one, you don't need me to tell you what to do with your own property, and I'm not going to. I'm just the guy who read the file out loud. What you do with it from here is yours. I've got another one on a recall that went the other way, where the company actually chased owners down to fix the thing, and the contrast will tell you everything about which companies are betting you'll never find out. It's right there. I'll see you in it.